Welcome to Byte-Sized Agency Briefs, a webinar series that packs a ton of important agency information on one topic from one expert into a 25-minute brief. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Thanks for tuning in. This is Byte-Sized Agency Briefs. I'm your host, Steve Guberman from Agency Outsite, where I coach agency owners to build the agency of their dreams. Today, I'm talking with Ryan Watson from Upsourced Accounting. Ryan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you, and I think we got some not typically super exciting stuff to talk about, but we're gonna, two good-looking,
we're gonna make it.
Guys.
Oh my gosh,
we're gonna make it exciting.
Set the bar low, and then we're just gonna
launch it from there.
Launch over it. Yep.
Yeah. So talk about Upsourced. What are you guys doing? Your partner, co-founder, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So we've been around for a better part of a decade. The shortest way to describe it is to say we're an accounting firm for creative agencies. I would say that's a little bit of a misnomer, and I say that because unlike most traditional accounting firms, we don't really do any audit or tax. That's not, compliance-oriented services are not where we focus. We have partners for those things. Instead, we are focused entirely on the outsourced CFO service offering. So we deliver service in basically two chunks. One is designing and maintaining an accounting operations back office to be able to produce financial and non-financial data that we can use to make decisions. And then the advisory, where we sit side by side with you, looking and using that data to help you make predictions about the future and make choices about what to do about today. So we exclusively work with creative agencies. They're all over the country. We've got just over 100 of them. And I'd say like anywhere from call it like $1 million in revenue on the low end to 20 or 30 million on the high end.
Why creative agencies? Is that your background? Is it your partner's background? Do you just think we're fun people?
Well, it is a good question. So I would say it was a little bit of like good fortune and serendipity. So early on, I'm a Deloitte alum. So I started as like a very traditional CPA doing very traditional audit work for a bank. So, I don't know how like vanilla you could possibly get. But that was not like I didn't go into accounting because I'm just like charged up about accounting. Like I went into accounting because I really love small business. Like I like helping small businesses execute their strategy, plan for the future, hire people. Accounting was just like my tool in the toolbox. It was the way I could sort of help. And I'd not to go into like what it's like to be a Deloitte, but I didn't really feel that. I was not fulfilled in that way. I was an auditor, so I'm not helping small businesses in any way. So we left. And my partner and I, we had this vision for the CFO services, which, by the way, in 2012 was a little bit less common than it is now. But anyways, we knew that like, hey, we wanted to partner very meaningfully with our clients and deliver like a much more robust level of expertise than you would normally get from a firm. And so we knew early on, like, we're not going to be able to do that for everybody. Like, we can't credibly suggest we're experts in all industries. And so early on, we had the good fortune of having a few creative agency clients alongside all the other kinds of clients like restaurants and laundromats and like you name it, we did it. But we found a really cool kinship in the creative space, a very cool vibe. There's very much like a left brain, right brain thing. We're also just like, I'm a wannabe creative. So I look at the creative work with like wonder and I like to pretend like I can do it, but I can't. But everything I see is just like, it's mystical to me. I love it. And I will say that we often get some of the similar like that similar reverence in return. Like they look at the work that we do and they're like, our brain doesn't work that way. So there's a lot of mutual admiration and respect. They, the creative industry defers to, financial experts and they trust the guidance and they got a similar, like we have a lot of similar shared values, very similar vibe. And so anyways, we just, again, kind of just fell into a few early agency clients and we're like, oh my gosh, we are in love. And so we just said, hey, all the other stuff, let's like stop doing that and let's go all in on this space. And that's probably been 5 or 6 years now. And we haven't looked back. It's been a ball.
That's awesome. It's interesting because so you get a lot of agencies that fight the niching. And as a coach, I'm constantly pushing, like, you don't need to define a niche and that is the only world that you live in. But for marketing purposes and for talking about how do you promote yourself, say that we do work in this space. And so to see you saying we only do work in this space, they've got to understand that makes you an expert here. You know
Yep.
this industry inside and out. You know the trends. You know like you said, how to see into the future, that kind of stuff. Whereas if
Yeah.
you're a generalist, I for one would not want to trust my $1 million plus agency with just some generalist. But the other thing that you said that's pretty interesting is the admiration for each other's crafts. There's kind of that ongoing joke in the creative space of, I was told there'd be no math. And so, unless you,
math here.
which is not true. Like anytime you're designing something, there's grid systems, there's all sorts of numbers built into things. But, so think about ownership and partnership. Most of them are creatives saying, I want to hang up my own shingle. Rarely are they business professionals with accounting degrees or CPA and experience or anything that say, I want to open an agency. So they're lacking that perspective on the math of an agency that you bring to the table.
Yeah, totally. And I want to go back to another point you said about like the idea of the fact that like it's interesting this is all we do, and I guess the point that I would make, especially this is maybe less true for some of our creative clients than it is in finance, but like in the world of like finance and accounting, like there is nothing like really magical about any of the things that any of us do. Like, yes, I think that we have some of the smartest people, but I would probably be like, that is not a unique opinion. I think every accounting firm thinks, oh, we only hire A players. We only have smart people. So it's like, what are we outsmarting each other? I don't think so.
Right.
I think the only real way that we can differentiate each other is to say, look, agency owner. I mean, again, I had a very I had a conversation just like this, like 2 days ago, which is like, hey, agency owner, you've got a $5 million business in a specific space. I know that I have seen this movie. I've seen this movie exactly. I actually work with a client that is, just like you. And here's the good news. They're 3 or 4 years ahead of you, right? So they're doing 11 million. And you just mentioned to me like, we're doing, whatever it is, 15% in margin. And I don't know if we can do a lot better. Like, hey, guess what? Actually, you can. This business is doing a 27% margin. I'll tell you exactly how you do that, right? And so that's the secret sauce. Like, we're not good at what we do because we're just more brilliant. It's just like, no, we just have better data points. Like and it takes a long time. Like we've invested a long time to accumulate those, and now it's just pattern matching. It's just like, okay, I've seen that this works. I've seen that works, and that's just what makes it. But it's also fun. Like and it compounds on itself.
Yeah. So you say, in what you guys do, you work with scaling agencies to understand their numbers better, to know what they need to grow. And that's part of like a life cycle event. What are some of those, I guess, big milestone life cycle events? What are some of those, you mentioned data points. What are some of the things, at $500,000, I'm more worried about certain things than I am at 5 million. What are some of those jumping off points?
Yeah, good question. Because I'd say that's a thing that we really, this I would say, like, broadly speaking, the financial industry loves to sort of talk about everything generically. Like, here's the 20 KPIs that you should look at if you're a creative agency, right? It's like, I would tell you, yes, that those are 20 KPIs, accurate. But like, should you look at all 20 right now? No, there's probably just like 1 or 2 maybe. And again, I think it is very contextual based on like where you are. So we have a way, after 11 years of doing this, we have a set of like stages that we think we have seen. I don't know if there's probably 1,000 different ways that you could segment agencies, but in terms of their life cycle, we look at them in like 4 stages. Let's say the first is kind of like creating the agency. So it's like, obviously 0 to, and I'm going to use like round numbers that have applicability and can be proven wrong in other situations. But here's round numbers: $0 million in revenue, right? That's the kind of the creating stage. And this is like, this is entrepreneur territory. This is where most businesses go to die. This is like, you just have to put this thing on your back. It's very hard. Like the number one problem that like a lot of these agencies have is, if you can go the W-2 route of trying to like service your agency, but often you're so small that it's hard to generate enough revenue to pay for the very W-2 employees who do all the things that you need to do, right? And so utilization is low, margin is low, and you're trying to scrap through to stay alive. That's a very tricky problem to solve. And the alternative to that, of course, is like freelance or contract talent. That's also very tricky. I mean, this is a conversation we had yesterday, which is you can go that route and you can create like positive unit economics right out of the gate and preserve your margin. But now you're at the whim of a freelance market that has a high degree of variability. And if you don't have like really firm trusted relationships, you might have revenue that you leave on the table because you have somebody who chose a different project than the one that you sold. And again, like it's hard. That's why that's why these things are valuable and getting there is worth something, because getting from 0 to $1 million is really tough. And so, so that's kind of like the first stage. And I would say that like the focus there, and I'll talk a little bit about, I mean, you can stop me at any time, Steve, but I'll talk a little bit about like the hierarchy of financial needs that we often work our way through, usually in the next stage. And that next stage is what I would call building the agency. So like it exists, you got to $1 million. Now, like, let's make this thing a real business. And because, we can start
let me just jump in. You probably got to $1 million by, like you said, really just putting in too much time.
Shoestring, bubblegum.
Scrappy as hell.
Yeah, you got problems all over the place. Yeah, I mean, you got concentration problems, you got margin problems, you got, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that none of those matter, but the number one thing matters is like becoming a going concern, like being a business that should stay in business. Right. And sometimes you just have to make some really tough trade-offs. And so often when you're kind of getting to that $1 million mark, which is maybe the first inflection point where we start to see clients where we're a good fit to help them. Yeah, you're coasting in on fumes. You're like, okay, we got it, but like we got to do everything differently. And so that's where we start to think about the hierarchy of financial needs. And this is where we're very, again, you could look at all sorts of KPIs, but we prefer to take the approach of let's look at your finances in a hierarchy of needs, similar to like a Maslow's hierarchy. And we're just going to go stage by stage. We're not going to look at the next step until we've got the first step. We can't worry about self-actualization until we have found shelter, right? So I'll say them quickly, but because this is like what the game is in the building your agency stage, which is like 1 to 3 million or 4 million, which is like solvency. Like that's the first, like, can you make payroll next month? I mean, that trips a lot of people up that we start to work with. Like, okay, forget about everything else. That we're worried about that. So then when we clear that, then it's like project profit. Like, am I generating an adequate gross margin on the services that I provide? Because if the unit economics are bad, if I'm generating like a 20% gross margin, nothing else matters. Like, of course I'm not generating operating profit. Of course, like nothing else matters, right? So let's figure that out. Of course, that's either, a rate per hour problem or a utilization problem. There's a lot of things we can do there, but we're not going to go past there until we're there. And then when I've got like a unit economic business, like a business with good unit economics, a good gross profit, now we're cooking with gas. We got something. This can work. Mm-hmm. And so now we're looking at things like we're looking at cash reserves. Like, do I have an adequate amount of cash to sustain the endemic ups and downs of like project-based cash flow? And then I'm looking at operating profits. Now I'm worried about like my bottom line, and I'm trying to shoot for a 20% or greater operating profit margin. And then finally, and this is like the capstone, this is the piece that you have to nail before we can think about the next stage. And that's predictable revenue. That's having a repeatable revenue generation engine where we can actually build a forecast. And we have some sort of rational or credible belief that we can accomplish this. We're not just throwing darts at a dartboard. And so again, that's kind of like, that's the exercise that we would go through. Many of those things are Cadillac problems to that creating agency 0 to 1. Like, yes, these would all be great, but honestly, like just get to it, just get there. And then we'll work through this. And then, this is, and I'd say maybe 40% of or 30% of the agencies we work with are probably in this like building stage, working through the hierarchy of financial needs to the point we have that predictable revenue growth. And then the last one I'll mention is the, so we have like the creating, building, and then what we call is the growing, which is like, let's say 3 to 4 million to, I don't know, 8 to 10. And that stage is really like, okay, the business is working, right? And we've made our way through the hierarchy of financial needs, but like things start to break at this level. Like the partners that like we're running the business are now several layers removed from any of the decisions that are happening and are unable to sort of bear hug their way around all of the levers of the business. And things start to fall apart. Morale starts to tank. Client starts to leave. And it's because you just can't now. Like, you've exceeded the limits of your own control. And you now need to create a system where the next level of deputies, and that could look like service line owners, it could look like operations managers, it could look like account managers, however you set up your agency. But those next level of deputies now need to be empowered and incentivized to do the decision making and to control their component of the P&L and to take over where you left off. And that's the trick in that stage, right? In that growing stage. And we've, I'd say another 30% of our agencies are kind of in there. So anyways, they all have unique challenges, all very, it's all a different problem to solve, but it's very contextual based on where you are.
Yeah. So I guess I want to focus on for just a minute or two, those first two stages, 0 to 1. They're in the early stage startup. It's typically an owner and she's got a handful of freelancers. Maybe she's brought on her first W-2, or maybe she's got a partner who handles the business side of it. So, that kind of model up to like the 2, 3, 4 million, where now there's, I don't know, a handful of employees, 10, 15 employees, something like that. At what point, and what are the aspects of what's being brought in-house from a financial standpoint versus outsourcing it to, a company like yours, or having, bookkeepers are pretty common early on.
Yeah.
When the owner can relinquish control and say, all right, my time is better served biz deving versus bookkeeping. Like, what are some of the things that agencies at that level should be bringing in-house versus outsourcing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, look, I'd say specific to financial stuff. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head, which is bookkeeping is relatively common, and I would probably go ahead and that is a thing that I would recommend, like having somebody do. The alternative would be yourself, and I would say don't do that. And if for no other reason than just like compliance headaches, and having just ever so slightly a little bit of data that you can start to use when you get to the sort of building stage. But we're not going to be doing a high degree of analysis. We're not really going to be using the result of a lot of your bookkeeping in the early stages. Certainly not like sub 500,000. I mean, again, there's exceptions to every rule, but a big chunk of a big chunk of that stage, you're not going to be doing that. Again, for instance, like we will often come in at the $1 million mark, give or take. And that's the point where it actually makes sense to invest. Like we have something that we want to perfect versus do we or do we not have something? Again, I think the thing that is, to be perfectly honest with you, Steve, you will maybe have a stronger point of view on this than me. But let me tell you my point of view, and you tell me what you think, which is I think that there's the sales and marketing at the like 1 million range. I think that it is smart to like outsource and get help around positioning, choosing why you exist, what you should do here. Definitely like, how do I create a sales motion? What does that all look like? But there's doing it all yourself, right? Like I'm going to make all these decisions and I'm going to do all the execution. Then there's like, I'm going to find some good partners who can tell me what I don't know and help me be better. And then there's like, I'm just going to hand the keys over entirely to someone else. I haven't seen a ton of success with I'm going to be completely absent from this process. I'm not going to be engaged in choosing like my reason for existing or my positioning, or I'm just going to hire like an outsourced biz dev firm and they're just going to do all my lead gen. And leads are going to come raining from the sky. Like I haven't seen it be successful. If you're not pretty engaged in that, it's hard because it requires a lot of iteration. It requires a lot of perfecting. Like you're not going to get it right out of the gate. And if you're not like part of that, like in the sausage, I think it's tough. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. What's your take on that?
I agree there. And again, it's at different stages. I think at above the 2-3 million, there's a team in-house that's controlling and running that machine, and maybe there's an outsourced somebody that's helping advise from a sales standpoint, from positioning and marketing. But there's also that change around the 700 to $1 million in revenue where we aren't who we thought we were going to be or who we should be, and we need to kind of mature a little bit. Who do we reposition as? And
totally.
And I think all of that points to and you said it as your capstone in that I think $1 million to 3 or 4 is that predictable income. And I think that's like the nebulous that smaller agencies have such a hard time cracking the nut of. Like,
totally.
like, how do I get those retainers? How do I stop selling projects over and over and over? Because, the flywheel is just, you're burning it out, and if you can get 50, 70% of your annual revenue in retainers, you're not on easy street, but you're on easier street, right?
Oh, totally. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I agree. I mean, that is, so you of those things, of the hierarchy of financial needs, I mean, solvency is hard because at some point, like, we can sort of like squeeze a rock for as much juice as we can. Like, there may be some things out there like AR, or, certainly there may be opportunities to sort of lower our burn and increase our run rate and therefore like our solvency. But, in some cases that's a sales, it's a revenue generation problem. But once we're kind of past that, all these things are like fixable, but repeatable revenue generation is the hardest one for sure. Cause it's just got, so, as you mentioned, like, it's very nebulous, and there are a lot of moving pieces. It's not like a finite bucket of reasons why that's difficult. I will say, at a minimum, again, you tell me what you think, but I would say, like, I don't know that I've ever seen a perfect playbook. Right? Every agency is a little bit different. Every agency is particularly, but it's the pursuit of the system that is helpful, and not the, like, most of our business comes from referrals and organic, and like that works for me, right? That the lack of pursuit is just going to keep you right where you are, if not, ultimately shrink. So,
yeah, I think most businesses will say, yeah, we've grown so well on referrals, word of mouth, and it's great, and it's the best kind of business to get, and I agree with that. But it's opportunistic growth, and you can't scale based on waiting for a referral from your Aunt Tilly, and you can't scale based on waiting for somebody else to get you business. There's got to be a plan in place. It's got to be strategic, driven to budgetary goals, and we're going to want to bring on a new whatever copywriter or designer or whatever. All right, great. You need some cash in the bank to do that. You've got to chase the business. And I think also thinking more about culture and how culture drives revenue, chasing the types of businesses agencies want to work for. You can't wait for those referrals from the businesses that fit into our niche. So I think there's a lot there. I want to shift gears from the super nerdy stuff we're talking about. I love it, and I think there's so much. Agency owners are down in the day-to-day of chasing clients, managing their team, doing really great work. The focus on their numbers is probably the last thing they want to do. So I'm glad we're talking about this.
Of course, that's true.
Real quick rapid fire questions for you.
Okay. Oh boy.
What is, and with any of these, business or personal or related or whatever, what's a book or podcast or audio book or show that you just can't get enough of right now?
Okay, so I don't know if you've listened to this podcast. I'm going to say the name, and it sounds like the broiest name in the whole world. So the name of the podcast is My First Million. Are you familiar with this podcast? It's called My First Million. Okay, so the podcast is very broy, but or the name of it is very broy. It's actually not. So it's called My First Million. I think it's as applicable for like venture-backed startup founders as it is for agency owners, and it's a couple of operators who are mostly they have some like other operators on, but mostly it's just they are live brainstorming different opportunities, different market segments. How do I create a business out of this? And it's cool. Like, it's a lot of energy. It's such a unique show. It's one of the few where as an entrepreneur, like all of our clients are, that I've found like, oh, I'm listening to somebody like me and not, a VC or a luminary or something. And this is coming from a person who like also records a podcast. So I know, but like, it feels like, oh, this is authentic. This is great. So it's my number one recommendation. My First Million. It's great.
I'll check it out. Yeah, I'll add it to the list. That's awesome.
Yeah, you'll dig it.
What is a new tool that you've recently kind of integrated into your day-to-day, your work, your family life, your business life, whatever that is now, like, completely indispensable?
Yeah. So I have recently, like, I have a lot going on, and I have, embarrassed to say, like, I, for the longest time, would be the, like, I'm going to wake up every day and just decide what to do today. And it's like no way to live. I don't know what I was doing, but that's what I would do. And I decided, like, things got really busy, and I was like, I'm going to end this once and for all. So I adopted the like GTD like methodology, and I of course I tailored it to like what works for me. I used a tool called Things to help me do it. And it has been life-changing. I had part of the secret is I had a friend who was like a bit of an accountability coach for me. And so it's just like habit formation 101, right? And so I think if the tool is helpful and the framework is helpful, but they're all just like interchangeable, right? But I have adopted a formal like a GTD methodology using the tool things, and I've never been more productive. I've never felt more like, I don't know, switched on. And again, I think mostly it was just like deciding to do the habit and then building the habit, but feeling great.
Take that. For those not in the know, GTD, Getting Things Done, really great, quick read book, quick listen. Drawing a blank on the author's name right now, but I can see the blue and orange.
Yeah,
book.
yes.
It's over there on the shelf somewhere. Getting Things Done, David Allen. There you go.
There he is. Yes.
David Allen. So awesome. And then finally, an indispensable piece of business advice that you can share.
Well, big caveat on the indispensable part of this, but a thing that maybe this is not the best, but anyways, a thing that we say a lot. I stole it from my partner. He says it a lot, and so now I've co-opted it as a thing I say a lot. But I think it's actually kind of related to your last question. But this quote goes like, everybody thinks they have a software problem, and they don't. Everybody actually has a process problem. And so I would just say we have faced that so often, like, hey, Upsourced, what is the best tool for this? And what's the best tool? We're not able to time track, or we don't have a good capacity management platform, whatever it is. And it's always like tool first, because we just, we're nerds and we love technology, and that's all great. But our response is always like, cool, but like, let's build this in Google Sheets first. Like, forget about the technology. Let's build the motions, build the workflow, and then we'll layer on the technology. And that has been a somewhat transformative way of thinking about some of these workflow things. It's helpful.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Ryan, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining me today and opening up your brain and letting some of the knowledge out for our listeners.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Awesome.
Thanks again for tuning in to Byte-Sized Agency Briefs. As always, if you found value in this episode, chances are someone else will too, so please share it with your network. Also, if you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love, drop me a note. Let's get them on. Finally, find someone to hug today.